When we think about what it is that defines modern approaches to reward system design, the key feature that stands out over the past 20 years really has been this desire for the reward system to be strategic in some way, that it responds to the needs of the organisation, that it provides some added value to the way that the organisation functions, to assist the organisation to achieve its broader strategic aims, as opposed to just being some administrative or backroom activity, which it might often have been seen as for the preceding period of time that organisations have operated pay systems, where it was just simply a feature of doing business. It was just a thing that organisations had to do. It was just an opportunity cost. Over the past 20 years, really in tandem with broader developments across all of human resource management, all of the aspects of managing people in organisations has developed this strategic orientation, this desire to assist organisations. This has been a key feature of the development of reward systems, at least in theory. Whether that translates into practice is another question, but the key intellectual impetus, the key theoretical direction of what rewards are for and what they're supposed to do has all focused around this desire to provide some strategic assistance, to be of strategic relevance to organisations. So this developed along with through the work of Edward Lawler, and then became operationalized in a kind of accessible way by writers like Schuster and Zingheim. And there have been various ways in which writers have attempted to articulate this strategic intention. But it tends to boil down to a kind of handful of different areas of emphasis. The first one being, what is it that we need in an organisation? What is it that we need people to do in our organisation? What kind of employees do we want? What behaviours do we require in order for the organisation to effectively fulfil their objectives? If an organisation is trying to do X, then what does X imply in terms of what people we need and what those people should be doing within the organisation? Which then leads on to the question of how do we get those people? How do we find them? How do we attract them? How do we keep them in our organisation? The second feature of strategic reward is not just to see reward as a hygiene factor in the way that someone like Friedrich Herzberg might have thought about it, but how can we actively use reward systems to motivate employees, to get them engaged in the organisation, to encourage them to do the things that they're capable of, to encourage them to do the things that we need them to do, to encourage them to continue to develop their capabilities, their skills, their knowledge. So that reward is not just seen as something that gets people through the door, but has this continuing function, this continuing added value, which not just maintains the human resources of an organisation, but goes on to improve them. The third feature is something which it resonates with the relatively recent history of the management of people, which is the anticipated need not just to build an organisation, to have it function in a certain way, to have certain features, but to be part of the culture of the organisation. That it's not just that the organisation is set up in a certain way, but that the organisation has certain values, certain philosophy that are distinctive about the way that the organisation is, and so which then tends to direct the thoughts and feelings and behaviours of employees in ways that are useful. So how can we use rewards to build that kind of culture? How can we use rewards to reinforce the kind of structural orientations of the organisation so that we understand implicitly by the way that we are rewarded, and which therefore direct our thinking and the way that we understand the reality of organisations, but how does that encourage and reinforce ways of thinking, ways of behaving, understanding the relationships within the organisation in ways that's helpful to assist employees to interact effectively with each other. And the fourth broad approach is to understand how we can use rewards in ways that is sensitive to strategic constraints that the organisation faces, whether that's product market situation, the financial strength of an organisation, the labour market demands, the changing dynamics of all of those contexts in which organisations have to interact, that reward systems become part of that response mechanism, that they're part of the flexibility of an organisation as opposed to being simply a rigid, fixed cost that organisations have to meet on an ongoing basis. And so the desire for additional strategic usefulness of rewards goes hand in hand with the desire for rewards to become more flexible for organisations. Now, of course, this last point in particular is controversial because it implies, and it's a very clear implication, it's not particularly subtle, that rewards are seen as something that will change depending upon the circumstances in which an organisation finds itself. Now, this in turn means that organisations will seek to offset some of the risks that they might have traditionally held exclusively as part of being an employer onto employees. That if times get tough, then rewards might get worse. So employees have to bear that burden, bear the burden of risk that has traditionally not been seen as part and parcel of the lot of the employee. And this is at a point which we've made very clearly in Adheri's critique of strategic reward systems and the growth of performance-based reward systems and so on. So these are the features of what strategic reward systems are supposed to be like. That they're supposed to allow organisations to orient themselves in their competitive scenarios in a more effective way, to provide a conduit to a more competitive, a more strategically useful future. Now, as with many management intentions, whether reality actually lives up to those desires is another question. A relatively recent paper by Trevor and Brown does raise some serious doubt as to whether this strategic orientation towards rewards actually happens that much in practice, or whether, or rather, organisations spend a lot of time looking at what each other do, following fashions and picking up on what the latest buzzy approaches might be in rewards, and simply doing that it's more about following fashion in rewards rather than finely tuning their reward systems to meet their particular bespoke strategic needs. So we need to take some of these fine words, if we think they're fine, we need to take them with a pinch of salt, if not more. Now, in terms of how we put in place these strategic approaches, of course, we can look to the broader strategic literature and the broader strategic HR literature, which provides with common guidance around these kinds of approaches. And there is this ongoing debate between best fit approaches, contingency approaches to strategic design, or best practice approaches, which identify certain features of approach which just seem to convey or confer advantages on organisations. And we can take our pick in relation to this. A broad approach that we tended to see organisations taking, or suggested that organisations might take is this best fit approach, that organisations look at their particular needs and they design their reward system accordingly. Now, it might be that we take a very broad approach, and so we might look at ideal type organisational strategies, whether we are an innovator, a cost cutter, customer focused, and then we drill down from that to think, well, an organisation which is attempting to follow this particular type of strategy will tend to need to achieve certain types of business responses. So a cost cutter will focus on operational excellence, for example, or an innovator will have to be very good at cycle times so that they keep hitting the new trends, the new needs of the market, and so on. And that those business responses in turn will imply certain human resource needs, that they need to have certain kinds of behaviours expressed by their employees, and that we match our reward systems to those required behaviours of employees. So certain types of rewards will be appropriate given certain types of strategies. Or we might try and do something which is more finely tuned, more bespoke, more individual to the nature of an organisation. And so we may look to try to unpick some of the particular competitive dynamics of an organisation's situation. We try to understand the organisation's product market situation, their labour market situation, where their corporate strategy is headed, to think about the culture and values that the organisation has, the context in which the organisation is operating in, not just the market context, but the broader social and political context, to think about what the particular employees of an organisation might desire, what they want. They are, after all, the subject of the reward system, who it's all intended to satisfy. What do they want? If there's a union present, what is the union's agenda? Where we operate a range of different HR systems, how can we align the reward system with those so that they're all pushing in the same kind of direction? So we're looking to understand, to analyse the particular circumstances of an organisation's strategic situation, and to unpick all of those and then think, well, how do we put in place a reward system which complements that situation? How can we identify what behaviours will be encouraged by particular kinds of rewards that are congruent with the circumstances that the organisation finds itself in? Now, by doing that, we start off broad. We think about our broad objectives for the organisation's reward strategy. What things can it do? What things can it help with? And then we need to think, well, if that's what we want the reward system as a whole to do, how can we make sure that those things are achieved within the reward system? Because the reward system is made up of lots of different individual reward mechanisms and reward practices and policies and so on. So we need to dig a little deeper, and we think, well, most reward systems will have some mechanism to determine who should be the most important people in the system and who are the least important people in the system. A system of alignment, as George Milkovich refers to it as. So how can we translate our broad objectives for the reward system through strategic decisions about how we do alignment? Which jobs should go at the top? Should we be even thinking about jobs as the basis for how we create a hierarchy in our reward structure? Should we be looking at skills or knowledge or competence or whatever that might be? So how do we align people within our system? How do we make decisions about how competitive we want our rewards to be compared to other people that we are competing with in our product markets and within our labour markets? So How do we make that kind of decision? How can we make that decision in a way which complements the broader strategic thrust that the organisation is attempting to make? How can we make decisions about the individual contributions that people make to the organisation? Because it's one thing to decide this job is more important than that job, but then there will be differences in the people who undertake those jobs, the individual employees. They're not all created equal, and they don't all perform at the same level all of the time. So to what extent do we want to distinguish within jobs, within groups, within the collective, and get down to individuals? And how should that be expressed? What should we be rewarding people for? How do we do that? What is the mechanism? How can we put that into practice? What are the policy arrangements and all of those kinds of things? So big strategic reward policy decisions that we trace back through, and hopefully that takes us in a fairly coherent and straightforward way back to where the organisation is trying to get to in a broader corporate strategy sense, and that we can see the linkages so that it all adds together and it all reinforces the kinds of outcomes that we're trying to achieve, so that our rewards add competitive strategic value to the organisation.